Thank you, Sophie. So welcome, everyone. Just a little bit of background, and I want to let you know that today's webinar does come to you from the Colorado Farm to School Task Force with Spark Policy Institute, and we want to gratefully acknowledge our partner and host for this series, which is the Healthy Farms, Healthy People Coalition. Sophie and I will be conducting today's webinar. Sophie is a research associate at Spark Policy Institute, where she provides research and evaluation services focusing on food security, nutrition, health, and education. And my name is Lynn Kathleen. I'm a director at Spark. I have over 25 years of experience in academic and applied public policy research, and I am the lead staff to the Colorado Farm to School Task Force. Spark Policy institutes with partners and communities, policymakers, advocates, and the general public throughout the country. We combine research, evaluation, and facilitation to help our partners solve complex societal problems that defy easy solutions. Our projects also often result in the creation of toolkits, such as this Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit, and we're always excited to share our toolkits. The task force was legislatively mandated in 2010 by the Colorado General Assembly. It has 15 appointed members. It is charged with increasing the use of local farm and ranch products in school food service programs to improve child nutrition and to strengthen local and regional agricultural economies. The task force receives no funding from the state of Colorado. However, it has successfully attracted a wide array of funders. Currently, it has 2 multi-year grants, one from the Colorado Health Foundation and one from the Gates Family Foundation. In 2012, the task force identified a major gap in farm-to-school programming in Colorado. We simply had very little information about what our districts were doing, and the districts engaged in farm-to-school were not systematically assessing their farm-to-school activities. So to address this gap, the task force, along with Spark, developed the Farm-to-School Evaluation Toolkit for Colorado. And with a 2-year USDA Farm to School grant, the toolkit is now being rolled out nationwide through in-person workshops and webinar trainings. Today's webinar is the second in a 5-part series of the Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit. All the webinars will be archived at the link on this slide. So just to get started, we love to do polls and chats, but we're going to start with this poll about who attended or has viewed our overview webinar from last week. So Sophie, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. So the polling panel should be open on the right side of your screen. Please let us know whether you attended last week's webinar, viewed the recording, or if this is the first webinar in the series you've attended. You'll have about 1 minute to select your answer. And I do see a few people joining us a little bit late. If you would like links to the handouts, please send me a message in the chat box at the right side of your screen. So answers to the poll are still rolling in. I'm going to leave it open for about 10 to 15 more seconds to make sure everybody has a chance to answer. Okay, great. So it looks like over half of you did attend last week's webinar, so that's great. Welcome back. And some of you also viewed the recording. We hope you like the live version. It's a little bit more interactive. And then lastly, we have about a third of you where this is the first webinar in the series, so welcome.
Great. Always fun to find out who has done what at this point. And so if you are new, you should know that's no problem. This webinar will still be very useful to you, and you can always go back and look at our previous webinars. So you should have received these handouts in the reminder email, and of course you've seen the links on the first PowerPoint slide and also in the chat box. If you are joining us for the first time, you're going to be starting to work on step 2 with everyone else who already has filled out step 1 from last week. However, if you are new, you can always go back and fill out step 1 after this webinar. You will also need one of the 7 attachments. If you know which groups you will be evaluating, then just have that attachment ready. If you have not yet downloaded any or all of the handouts for today, please do it now. So you can go to this link on the Farm to School website and scroll down, and then you can download the overview and steps, the evaluation plan template, which you're going to be writing on, and one or more of the attachments. Today in webinar 2, we begin with a very brief overview of Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit, and then we're going to jump into today's content, starting with introducing you to the evaluation speak of outcomes, indicators, and measures. But don't worry, we're going to tie each of these to the reality of farm to school activities and programming. Next, we'll cover how to select and prioritize your outcomes, how to determine what is realistic to measure, and how to make sure you are measuring outcomes that actually reflect your program's impact. Logic models are a tool that will help you in this task. We'll also pay attention to the purpose of your evaluation, as this is an important determinant of what you'll need to know in order to know what you need to measure. And as always, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end, and along the way, we'll be doing some polling and having opportunities to share information with each other through the chat box. By the end of this hour's training, you will have increased your understanding about farm to school outcomes and how these are tied to indicators and measures. You'll have made progress on identifying and selecting outcomes that you will document on your evaluation plan, and you'll continue along the journey of increasing your confidence to undertake an evaluation. Let's first start with a brief overview of the Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit, and I'm going to pause just for a moment here to remind folks who've been on the webinar before and those who haven't that I like to go through these in a pretty fast way, and that you do not need to take notes trying to capture everything I am saying. I will be sending out a hard copy or a PDF with all of these notes and our slides after this webinar, and so you'll have all of my talking points. What you should do as you are watching today is go ahead and jot down those things that strike you as, ooh, I really want to remember this, or things that you want to ask questions about, or anything like that. But don't sit there and try to take my verbiage verbatim. That's not a great way to do this webinar, and it's not nearly as fun. So first, I want everyone to know that our Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit, while you already know is on the Colorado Farm to School website, it is also now available on Spark's Tools for Social Innovators site. Just quickly, I want to show you what the toolkit looks like on this new site, because it's super, super useful in how it's broken out, and I think you will find the format of this website to be extraordinarily good for actually digging into small components of the toolkit. So here you can see a screenshot of last week's step 1, preparing for your evaluation. Every step on this website provides a short description of what the step is addressing. Pull-down menus are the activities and work within each step. So for example, in preparing for evaluation, it includes deciding which farm to school activity to evaluate, because of course you can't evaluate everything. It also talks about the purpose of your evaluation. Is it program improvement, information for stakeholders, information for funders, and it goes into more depth about each of those. Considerations around timing, and so on and so on. And then finally, every step includes the archive of our weekly webinar trainings. Now, just a reminder of what's in this toolkit. The Farm to School Evaluation Toolkit overview walks you through each step of the evaluation process. Last week, we described components of the toolkit and began filling out step 1 of the evaluation template. Today, we're going to focus on step 2, identify your outcomes. In our webinar training series, we cover every step, and you will work with the template and attachments in each webinar. Just as a reminder, the toolkit contains a how-to guide, the evaluation plan template, 7 attachments, and 3 appendices. Each of these were overviewed last week, and if you need a reminder of their contents, please do go back and look at webinar number 1. Okay, let's get started on number 2. To begin with, let's think about evaluation from the standpoint of what we do and why we do it. There are 2 concepts that I want to cover. The first is what we call a sphere of control. The sphere of control is, as the name suggests, those things we have control over, or at least we think we do. It is the activities of our program, the deliverables to our funders, the timeline of milestones reached, and the number of people involved in our program. These are the things we do. In an evaluation, these are the metrics, or our count of what has occurred. These are typically the things that we do measure. They tell you all about the effort you have put in, but they don't tell you about the why bother of the program. The second concept is the sphere of influence. The sphere of influence is the change we hope to see occur through the farm-to-school programs we implement. These can be categorized into short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. So, for example, in a school garden program, a short-term outcome might be that students have increased awareness and knowledge about how plants grow. Or they may have an appreciation that where one lives determines what type of food can be grown. Or that being a locavore means prioritizing foods that are grown locally. All of these are examples of things we would hope a student would learn by participating in a garden program that included lesson plans about plant biology and local food systems. While you have control over creating the garden, having students participate in the garden, developing and teaching the curriculum, you do not have control over whether those outputs of your farm-to-school program will actually result in student learning. Learning falls within the sphere of influence, yet it is the sphere of influence is the reason that we do all the good work that we do. So as you likely have figured out, the sphere of control leads to the sphere of influence. And as we move forward in today's training, and indeed throughout your evaluation planning, we're going to talk a lot about our activities, so the sphere of control, and our outcomes, that sphere of influence. If you're ever feeling stuck on what you're measuring, return to these concepts. Okay, let's pause for a moment. We'll be digging deeper into examples of outcomes in the sphere of influence, but it might be fun just to get some quick thoughts about what you all are doing. So if you would like to share one example of what you are hoping to influence through your farm-to-school program, please do so by typing in the chat box. And Sophie will repost and I will read them to you all. Okay, let's get going. Tell us what it is you're hoping to influence. What's that change that you're hoping to have happen because you're doing the work that you're doing in Farm to School? Here's one, for youth to eat more fruits and vegetables. That's a great one. And indeed, I might point out that is what we would call a behavior change, and we'll be talking about where that fits on the types of outcomes soon. Others? Oh, nice. Improved school lunches and more kids participating in nutrition education. Nice. Youth empowerment. We want teams to plan and lead farm-to-school activities. Oh, that is fantastic. In fact, I love to hear that because that is, that's not just about this amazing engagement that will really make a difference because they are really doing the work. It's also about creating the next generation of, leaders who are going to be taking forward this important healthy food, local food movement. Increased use of local produce in the cafeterias. Yes, this increased local procurement is such an important component. To connect people with the origin of their food, all ages, not just the kids, all of them. That's great. That's huge outreach. The teachers, the principals, the parents, all of them. For kids to try a vegetable they've not tried before. I love that, and that happens so much when you do garden programs, when you do taste testing in the cafeteria. Another one on youth empowerment. We want the teens to plan and lead those farm-to-school activities. And to connect people with the origin. Oh, these are all ones that I have seen already because I believe that we're getting them reposted. That's why I was like, wow, look, everybody's doing a lot of the same things. Got it. To reduce obesity and to boost economic viability for local farmers. Okay, wow. You guys have wonderful outcomes that you are shooting for. And the great thing about this is that all of these things we really can get to through measuring when we set up our measurements in the right way. And so keep those outcomes in mind as we continue on in this evaluation training. Okay, now I want to introduce you to how a logic model can organize the what's and the whys into a format that will easily facilitate your evaluation planning. Logic models use words and/or pictures to describe the sequence of activities thought to bring about change and how those activities are linked to the results the program is expected to achieve. The process for thinking through change includes identifying the problem, so what does the community or school need? Naming the desired results, so way at the end, what's the vision for the future? What do you hope your program will achieve? All those things you just told me about. And then between the problem and the vision is the strategy you will have developed to address that problem and reach your goal or future vision. The strategy consists of your program components. Here is a typical logic model. It is a simplified pictorial depiction of the relationship between your program's activities and its intended effects. So let's break it down based on our previous 3 conceptual buckets: problem, vision, and strategy. First, you'll want to identify the problem or problems. On the far left-hand side here, depicted by the arrows, is information about what the problem is that you are addressing. Here, this is the situation, and within the situation are priorities that are linked to why this situation or problem is an issue. So, for example, you may work for a community garden organization, and in the organization's mission, vision, values, or mandates may be statements about the importance of increasing food system knowledge of youth and adults. A problem identified by your organization is the lack of youth knowing where their food comes from. And within the situation, you may want to articulate why youth do not know. So, for example, we have a lack of agricultural and food systems education within our schools now. Many kids live in urban areas, and there's just a lack of knowledge, firsthand knowledge about an agricultural economy or way of life. Next, you'll want to name the desired results. So what is your vision that you have for the future? In a logic model, the desired results are your goals, which are your outcomes and impacts. There are really 3 types of outcomes. Short-term are also known as the very first outcomes you can expect from your program to achieve if it is well implemented. These are basically learning outcomes. So things like awareness, knowledge, attitudes, opinions, aspirations, motivations. Next come medium-term outcomes, those that you would expect to occur after a short-term outcome has been achieved. And these are really action outcomes. So that part about changing their eating habits, trying new food and changing and liking those new foods and choosing those are behaviors. Also, practices, decision-making, policies, and social action can sometimes fall in these intermediate-term outcomes. And then finally, long-term outcomes, which are also called impacts, follow upon the achievement of short and medium-term outcomes. These are big outcomes. These are system changes, be they social, economic, civic, or environmental. Now, between the problem and the vision is the strategy you will have developed to address the problem and reach your goal or future vision. This is shown in your logic model under the category of outputs. There are 2 components: the work action strategies of your program, such as building educational school gardens, conducting workshops for teachers, developing and implementing educational curriculum for students, teaching garden skills, and so on. And then there are the target groups of your program, or who you intend to be reaching with your program. When you pull it all together, you have a graphic representation of your program, the participants you're targeting with your program, and the outcomes you hope to achieve. The logic model is a great tool to help you plan your evaluation, as it keeps you focused on your activities, target audience, and intended outcomes. Each is information that is necessary in order for you to design your evaluation. Now, I want to look a little bit more about a very specific and relevant logic model. This one was developed for an actual school garden. It was called the People's Garden. It has inputs, outputs, and outcomes. The inputs are the staff, research, money, and materials for the school garden. The outputs are divided into those two categories, activities and participants. Here, the activities are what is happening in the school garden or to support the school garden. Here we see a lot of curriculum sessions are specified, in particular sessions on nutrition, plant growth needs, and beneficial insects. We also see skill building activities, including planting, weeding, and harvesting. The participants are the target audience that's involved in the garden program, and here we see they're targeting primary school students who will be using the garden, and the teachers will also be involved, likely in teaching the curriculum. But don't forget about others who come into contact and support your garden, such as community and parent volunteers. And finally, this garden program has identified administrators as participants. Likely, these would be the school principal and vice principal. Everything within the outputs column falls within our sphere of control. These are the things we'll want to measure: how many workshops were conducted, what type, and how many garden activities occurred, how many students and teachers participated, and so on. These are the easy things to measure, and they should be measured because they show and demonstrate the activities that are occurring and who and how many people are being reached by your program. But now let's look at the final three columns on that logic model, and these are those outcomes of your program. These three columns reflect what has happened over time. In the People's Garden, the short-term outcomes are those learning outcomes of awareness, knowledge, and knowledge development. The medium-term outcome is the action outcome of practice, so literally learning the skills to grow edible plants. And the long-term outcomes are the system changes that result in a culture that appreciates fresh food production and quality, embraces physical activity, and appreciates nature. Everything within the outputs falls within the sphere of influence. It is the changes that should occur through your implementation of the program. These are the more complicated things to evaluate, yet it is exactly this information that is the most important to know, because it will tell you if your program is having its intended impact. A logic model is an important tool for depicting your farm-to-school program in preparation for selecting your evaluation outcomes, indicators, and measures. So let's do a quick poll about your experience with logic models.
Okay, hi everybody. Again, the polling panel has appeared on the right side of your screen. You can this time select all that apply. And as Lynn mentioned, we'd like to know how many of you have had experience with logic models in the past. And I will leave this open for about 1 minute before the poll closes forever and ever. Okay, it looks like answers are still rolling in. I will leave the poll open for a little bit longer. Okay, great. So it looks like most of you have developed or helped develop a logic model, and some of you, I guess the same amount, are aware of logic models, and then some of you say it's new to you completely, and actually a few of you already have a logic model for your farm-to-school program.
Terrific. Logic models, as you will see, can be really useful as we're moving forward, and so it's lovely that we have a range of folks here. Everybody's going to get a little bit more insight into how better to use the logic models for a farm-to-school program. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go back one more time to thinking about outcomes, because these are really important for us to get nailed down. So outcomes are focused questions. Outcome-focused questions look for evidence that the program is benefiting participants and visitors and so on. These changes can take place, again, over the short, intermediate, or long term. Long-term outcomes are those things referred to as impacts often. And from our previous logic model, one of the short-term outcomes identified as a result of participating in the school garden program is an increased awareness of nutrition and where food comes from. A garden program that includes nutrition education and is growing a wide variety of plants can be expected to increase students' awareness about nutrition and how food is grown in the soil, not just simply found in the grocery store. Short-term outcomes are the most closely associated with your program activities. An intermediate outcome is one that is expected to take more time and exposure to develop, and is typically the result of a short-term outcome having been met. In the logic model on the previous slide, one of the intermediate outcomes is for students to learn how to grow edible plants. A school garden program that includes the full plant life cycle training, starting with growing seedlings to soil preparation, planting, watering, insect control, weeding, harvesting, and winterizing the garden, develops those agricultural practices in the student. The reason this is an intermediate rather than a short-term outcome is that it is more complex in nature to have all of those skills built and necessary in order to grow plants. A short-term outcome might be the developing of a few of the skills, like maybe planting the seedlings or weeding or maybe harvesting, but not the full set of skills needed to successfully grow your own food. Finally, there are long-term outcomes, or what we often call those program impacts. These evolve from both the short and intermediate term outcomes. Again, from the school garden logic model on the previous slide, one long-term outcome is the appreciation of fresh food. Now, this pushes the sphere of influence beyond the school garden and the cafeteria, all the way into the daily life of the home and community. Ultimately, most of our farm-to-school programs are really striving for these long-term outcomes. It really is the reason we do the work we do. But in your evaluation, you want to be careful and realistic about what your program has been able to achieve as well as what is realistic to measure. It is important to distinguish between short, intermediate, and long-term impacts. If you measure long-term impacts before it is possible for these to have occurred, your evaluation will be missing the things that have occurred and unable to show the good work that is already going on. Okay, we're going to stop for one more moment right now and check on the outcomes you plan to measure. So thinking about your farm-to-school program and purpose for your evaluation at this point, are you thinking you will be evaluating a short-term, intermediate, or long-term outcomes? And I'll just give you a reminder that those long-term outcomes are way down the road. So be careful about wanting to go too fast down that road, particularly if you have a very new program. Okay, tell us what you're thinking about doing. We'll give you 45 seconds. Yep, it looks like we're already getting folks answering this, so this is great. And you will see it on the right side of your screen. Just a reminder, is where you'll find the poll. You can check only one, even though you might have a desire to do some combination, but give us one. And, oh, you can? Oh, so I should not be running these polls. Next time I'm going to hand this over to Sophie. Okay, are we ready to report out? Okay, so 85% of you are going to be measuring short-term outcomes, 38% intermediate term, and just a few of you are going for those long-term outcomes. So that, to me, actually makes a lot of sense. I would expect to see the vast majority of people going for the short-term, just simply by virtue of, you know, how long have folks been having their programs going. And so let's keep going to learn more about how we can put these things in place. At this point, too, though, I want to give people an opportunity to ask some questions because I've thrown a lot of things at you. And so if you have been a person who was jotting down things going, ooh, I wish I understood this better, you now can do that, just throw it into the chat box. Shoot us a couple of questions, whether it's about the logic models or the short, intermediate, long-term outcomes, or anything else that we've covered so far that you're not quite sure of or you want a little bit more explanation about. And we'll read the questions, and then I will do my best to answer them. So in creating outcomes, should we develop the short and intermediate with the long-term outcomes in mind? I would say yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to, have the sense of where you hope to see, your program eventually or ultimately contributing to in the work that you do. It's important because it energizes you to know, kind of the big stuff that you're really going to make a change in. But it's also important because, frankly, it helps you better understand where the outcomes lie. And so if you have distributed across short, intermediate, and long-term and been very specific about thinking about the long-term, you won't mistakenly put a long-term outcome into an intermediate and then have a lot of trouble being able to truly measure that impact. Another question. There are so many things I want to measure because there are so many parts to the program. I don't know, one, how to measure, two, what to measure. So these are exactly the kinds of things that happen. And what I have to tell you is that what I'm hoping you have an opportunity to do by a couple of things. One, obviously, sitting through this training, but also literally putting into practice what we are teaching you in the training. You actually will be able to figure out what parts of your program are most important. So here I'm going back to the fact that what you need to have in place is an evaluation team, and that you also need to be figuring out what is the purpose of my evaluation, at least for the first evaluation or for the evaluation I'm doing right now. And so, for example, if you decide with your team, you know what, we really just need to know if this curriculum is working in the ways that we're hoping, even if you've got 5 other activities going on, focus on that one. And then you'll be able to figure out what you should be measuring in it and how to measure, because those are the things we're going to cover in the next coming webinars. Okay, I'm giving long answers. Do you think it's also important to adopt a theoretical model that underlies the logic model to explain the why and the how the activity should lead to the outcomes? So what I would say to that is that I think that's a great exercise, and if your group is, is one that feels comfortable engaging in that, then that is a terrific thing. It will only help you flesh out your understanding, and frankly, it will help you build a really good team because you'll have amazing conversations, but you do not have to do it. So it really is your choice. Another question, and then I'm going to cut it off, and if you've got one more or more than that, think of them, and we'll have Q&A at the very end. I've already answered this last one, so we are good to keep going. So those were great questions, you guys. Again, if you've got more that you want to be asking and you didn't have a chance in this little break for questions, just remember them because we will get back to Q&A at the end. So now let's turn our attention to measures and indicators. The terms indicators and measures are often used interchangeably. In part, this is because the two are actually very similar. And in part, it is because there is some disagreement about their definitions. So some evaluator courses will teach you that measures are those things that measure something, and indicators are those things that indicate something, which sounds like a really nice shorthand, and it sounds really easy, but it turns out it's even less clear the more you dig into it. So if that's not enough confusion, consider this. Sometimes what looks like one person's outcome or goal is another person's indicator. And measures could be couched in language that tells you what type of data needs to be collected, or it might be framed more in terms of an indicator or outcome. How in the world are you to figure out this maze of confusion? How you can hope to navigate through all this confusion? Well, this is my advice to you. Basically, you don't need to. Let go of the labels. It is not your role or your purpose in life to become a professional evaluator. You just want to evaluate an aspect of your farm-to-school program. At a certain point, the weeds really are the weeds. So I want to pause for just a moment, though. I'm not saying that indicators and measures are not meaningful. You will see that these words are used in many places as you do work in your evaluation. But because they are not consistently used, yet sound as though they should be and have a very specific meaning, the best way to approach it is to just stick to your script and try not to become a professional evaluator. That is, remember the purpose of your evaluation. Is it for program improvement? Is it to share information with your stakeholders? Is it for your funders? Knowing who your audience is will help you choose the right data to collect. Remember your sphere of control, the activities of your program, and the audiences you are reaching. This will help you identify which types of evaluation outcomes you can realistically expect to address, the data collection instruments that will work best, and the questions you need to ask or the existing data that you should be collecting. And finally, remember your sphere of influence, the short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes you're hoping your farm-to-school program will produce. Knowing what you hope to accomplish will help you select the appropriate questions and data collection measures. I want to stop for a moment and introduce you just really quickly to a very important resource. So I'm going to discuss indicators and measures using examples from the National Farm-to-School Network's evaluation framework, which is called Evaluation for Transformation. This is a good opportunity to better understand both evaluation speak and to see how the framework and this toolkit that we're teaching you about work together. But first, a little bit about the evaluation framework. The primary aim of the framework is to provide guidance on how to consistently track and monitor program activities, as well as track changes in local, state, and national policies that influence farm-to-school. To fully understand and realize the potential of farm-to-school, a cross-sectoral approach was developed. And indeed, farm-to-school has broad-reaching impacts that touch public health, community economic development, education, and environmental quality. So let's make some connections between what we have already learned and the evaluation framework that I'm just talking to you about right now. In the framework, priority outcomes, indicators, and measures, along with some example tools, are identified for each of those 4 key sectors that I just showed you in the previous slide. So let's just take a look at public health. Within public health, one research outcome is increased consumption of local and healthy foods. Indicator 2 in this framework under this outcome specifically identifies a population, students, as the population to evaluate. Measure 2.1 is increase in student awareness and knowledge about food and nutrition's impact on health. And this is measuring a short-term outcome because it's assessing the student's level of learning. Measure 2.3, which is increase in the amount of local fruits and vegetables students report eating, is measuring actions as it is about the change in behavior, and this would be an intermediate outcome on the logic model. The research outcome, its indicator, and measures all fall within the sphere of influence. Because while this is the reason we do the work, we really have no direct control over it. The best we can do is design farm-to-school activities that will influence students' behaviors about the local food and its health impacts and change their behavior to eat more local food. Okay, so we've actually covered quite a lot of information in a short amount of time. Specifically, we've discussed the difference between the sphere of control, so those things we have control over, and the sphere of influence, which is the reason we're doing all this work. And while we need to provide evidence of those things within the sphere of control, it's good to know how many students, for example, have participated, how many pounds of produce are being harvested out of your garden, and so on. To demonstrate the impact of your program, you need to measure those things that are within the sphere of influence. The concepts of indicators and measures were introduced. In reality, research and evaluation books go into a great deal about indicators and measures, and there are differing definitions of both. So remember, I can't emphasize enough to not get hung up on the terminology of evaluation speak. Instead, just stick what it is that you're trying to do. Know your activities, your target audience, and your outcomes. And finally, because many of you will be using the National Farm to School Evaluation Framework to guide your work, it is useful to think about how to link their indicators and measures to your activities and outcomes, and how you do that and use the evaluation toolkit to move forward. Okay, so let's get started on our work today. Get out your evaluation plan template if you haven't already. And if you were on last week's webinar, you could continue filling out the plan you already started. If you're joining us for the first time, no worries. You can still work on step 2. After today's webinar, you can go to our archives and listen to webinar number 1, Overview and Getting Started on Your Farm to School Evaluation, which will walk you through step 1 of the template. There are 7 attachments for the toolkit. Each attachment is focused on a specific group: students, parents, teachers, food service staff and operations, producers, school leadership, and community members. Before we go any further, we're going to do another quick poll. Sophie?
Okay. Hi, everybody. So as you can probably see already, I've opened up the poll on the right side of your screen. And again, I'm going to leave this poll open for about a minute. But basically, we'd like to know which group will be the main target audience for your evaluation. Again, you may end up having multiple target audiences, but for the purposes of this exercise, please select only one. Okay, it looks like people are still answering. I'm going to leave it open for a little bit longer, probably 10 to 20 more seconds. Okay, great. So it looks like the majority of you are, your target audience is students, which is actually pretty common. And then the next largest category is food service staff and operations, and then also community members. So great.
Wow, that's exciting. I love that we are looking also at school leadership and some producers. Oftentimes, these are not the groups that we are framing our evaluation for, and so that's really exciting because, of course, they are incredibly important in our farm to school, and I'm so pleased to see that people are going to be doing those, as well, of course, as students, because students are really those primary audience, so we often expect to see a lot of folks going after students. Okay, so this is the front page of attachment 1, and I'm using this as just an example. All of the attachments are laid out in the same way, so we're going to work through this one just to give you an idea of how you use the attachment. Many of you, of course, did actually indicate in the poll that students were going to be your target evaluation. For others not focusing on the students, just go ahead and have your own attachment ready to go if you've got it ready there, or just pay attention to exactly how to read the attachments as I show you in these next few slides. While you're getting your attachment ready, though, I'm going to have Sophie just share some of the Farm to School activity poll results from our pre-webinar series survey. And this is really just a little bit of a time filler, but it's also really interesting to hear.
Okay, hi everybody. So this graph shows the results of the pre-webinar survey that many of you answered before or after signing up for the series. There were about 63 responses, and as you can see, we have a diverse group of participants. Over 25% of you are leaders of a farm-to-school support organization, 25% are researchers or evaluators, and 25% are community partners. Many of you are public health practitioners, members, or participants of farm-to-school support organizations, and garden leaders. We also have some university partners, school food services, farmers and producers, teachers, farm-to-school coordinators, state agencies, AmeriCorps, Food Corps members, registered dietitians, master gardener volunteers, and students. So thanks for all of you joining us today. I will just mention that as you learn about your fellow audience members, you may also be thinking back to the section in last week's webinar about building your evaluation team. This may give you ideas for possible people to partner with as you move forward with your evaluation plan.
Again, a super diverse audience, very exciting. Now you're going to be identifying your farm to school evaluation outcomes. So let's take a look at the attachment and how you use it. But remember, one more time, I'm going to show you this slide on short, intermediate, and long. So remember that short-term outcomes are those things about learning, awareness, knowledge, attitudes. Intermediate is about action, it's behavior, it's commitments, it's practices, and long terms are those system changes. So it's important in your evaluation, whatever you are choosing to actually evaluate, that you're realistic about your program and what your program really can achieve and what you can show that your program can achieve. So let's take a look at student outcomes that are identified in attachment 1. So for example, in students, you might be interested in knowing a student's change in eating habits, attitudes toward new foods, knowledge about healthy foods and food systems through the implementation of a new curriculum, and all of these can be measured. You may want to know how many students are participating in your garden program and also going on farm field trips or choosing enrichment programs that support healthy eating, like maybe an after-school cooking class. From our logic model and spheres concepts, we see that these outcomes touch on short, intermediate outcomes. So that sphere of influence and the counts are the outputs, those things in the sphere of control. If you consider the purpose of your evaluation, you will be drawn to different outcomes too. For example, if your purpose is program improvement about garden learning, you'll be collecting data on students' knowledge and comparing it to the curriculum taught. The data collected will be very specific to the lesson plans. But if you actually want to share this information with stakeholders, so it's not program improvement, you want to share with the stakeholders what's happening with the kids in the garden, then that children learning is going to look different. You'll want to collect data from the students about, say, what did they say was the most amazing thing they learned? The purpose of your evaluation is important to determining the outcomes you'll choose and the data you will collect. Let's take a look at the type of outcomes in the toolkit for each target group. This table is actually from page 4 of the toolkit guide. We already discussed some of the outcomes for students, but let's look quickly at outcomes for other groups. The attachment for parents and for teachers includes different types of outcomes that tap into 4 specific areas: improved attitudes, increased knowledge, change in eating habits, and involvement in farm-to-school programs. For food service staff and operations, those outcomes are improved staff attitude and commitment, increased staff knowledge, increased use of local foods, salad bars, and affordability of the farm-to-school program, waste management changes, and facility changes. And then for attachment for the producers, it covers outcomes that are related to increased awareness about farm-to-school opportunities, food safety knowledge that is needed in order to sell to schools, the food safety practices on place on the farm, increased local sales, and involvement in farm-to-school programs. School leadership taps into both individual and system outcomes, so improved attitudes and or knowledge, and changes in policies and funding. And then finally, community outcomes may be important to the sustainability of your farm-to-school program, and I was really excited to see that some of you are planning to do evaluation of community members. These include those individual level outcomes of improved attitudes and knowledge, and system level outcomes of increased food programs and activities in the community. So everyone, take a look at your handout. If you've chosen attachment number 1, outcomes for students, your first page is going to look like this screenshot. As you page through your attachment, you will see on the far right-hand column many different outcomes. And in fact, in attachment 1, there are 14 specific outcomes. Oh, it's the left-hand column. I said the far right-hand column. That's great. I must see in mirrors. The far left-hand column, sorry. These are changes in the student's attitude, knowledge, and behavior and health that can result from farm-to-school programs, at least on this outcome for students. You're going to be selecting outcomes that are most relevant to your components of your program. So let's take a closer look at an attachment. First, I can't believe it, the far left column, you will see information about the type of outcome. In this example, we're looking at outcomes related to student knowledge. In the first row, next to that left column, are the outcomes. And here we see student outcome number 1, student gains in knowledge and awareness about school garden programming. In the next column, we provide a short description of the type of program activities that are likely to align with that outcome. So for outcome number 1, we point out that if your program includes garden education or a school garden, then this outcome may be very appropriate. It may not be the outcome you are really literally looking to do. There are other ones, but this one could be appropriate. Now, arguably, this particular description of the program activities and outcomes is a bit redundant, but many are not. Flip through your attachment and you'll see what I mean. In this next column, we describe the type of measurement tools we have found that address this outcome. And in this case, we have found 2 measurement tools, a survey and a focus group questionnaire. The survey collects quantitative data, and the focus group questions collect what we call qualitative data. In the remaining webinars, we will be talking about specific issues relevant to quantitative and those that are specific to qualitative data collection and analysis. And in the last column, we point you to specific data collection tools that have been used to measure this outcome. We provide the name of the tool, a hyperlink to download it, and other helpful information, like the page number if it's part of a large report, as is the focus group questions, or the notations about its use. For example, the survey tool is appropriate for both younger and older children. Now is a good time to give a real farm-to-school evaluation example. So here we see student outcome number 1, student gains in knowledge and awareness about gardening and school gardens. A classroom project in San Antonio's Independent School District was implemented with elementary-age children to bring experiential learning about horticulture, gardening, and developing relationships with peers. To evaluate the benefits of the participation, data was collected on 52 second and third graders. The data that they collected was they asked the kids to draw pictures about their experience in the garden. I love this example because sometimes we forget that, data isn't just like surveys or doing interviews or things like that. I mean, get creative because you know what? This kind of data tells, it's the pictures are 1,000 words, but particularly when you're dealing with young children, you will get so much more by asking them to draw a picture of what their experience is. And I have to tell you, it's really, really compelling. When you share it out, people love to look at these things, and it really makes them feel good, and it makes them realize how engaged the kids are in the activity. In addition to the qualitative interviews were actually done, not just the pictures, but they also did qualitative interviews, and they conducted those with children, parents, and teachers, the master gardener, and the school principal. Again, think about all of the people involved when you're collecting data because they're all going to give different points of view, and it's that big picture that you want to be reporting out on. A brief structured interview in this particular project was developed. Generally, the same questions were covered with all the participants and in approximately the same order. The questions were open-ended, and they consisted of the following inquiries. To the adults, they asked, what are the effects of gardening on the children? What are the changes you've noticed in the children? And to the children and adults, they said, what are the good things about the gardens? And what are the bad things about the gardens? The data was then coded into themes, and we're going to talk about how you do that in a future webinar. In their case, 6 themes emerged that demonstrated the garden had many positive effects on school children. The children demonstrated increases in moral development, enhanced their daily academic learning, gained pleasure from watching the products of their labor flourish, and had the chance to increase interactions with their parents and other adults. In addition, the children learned the value of living things, plus the anger and frustration that occurs when things of value are harmed out of neglect or violence. This is a great example of some unexpected learning that can come out of doing a very simple, straightforward evaluation. So for example, likely the evaluators did not have the expectation that moral development would be one of the learning outcomes, or that the kids would learn, you know, what it feels like to have something that they've nurtured get harmed, and how that in fact then led to them being able to develop some skills around how to process those types of feelings, as well as the importance of, you know, valuing not just what they're doing, but other people's work. As you review the attachments, you are going to select one or more of the outcomes that are realistic for your program and useful for you to measure. First, you're going to review all the types of activities listed in that column about activities. This may be a fit for your program if, and then find, you know, those that, oh, that is my program, great. Then it's time to take and remember the purpose of your evaluation. So if it's primarily to do a funding requirement, you're also going to want to be very aware of what outcomes are most aligned with your funder's priorities or the requirements in your grants. Hopefully you see some intersection happening there. Alternatively, if you're primarily doing an evaluation to improve your program, you may want to select the outcomes that you believe are the most important results from your program. So the reason your program really matters. Or you may want to select those that you feel like this is the new part that we've added to our program, or just not sure how well it's going to work. Well, evaluate that. That's a great one to evaluate. So if you have not already started, I want you to take a look at the outcomes on your attachment and star, highlight, circle, whatever. Do something that just indicates that you have found some, 1, 2, 4, that you think would be good ones that you would like to evaluate. So this is not a poll. You can keep looking at your attachment right now, and of course, as a reminder, you can never get through all of the things I'm teaching in this webinar. So what we're trying to do is just get you started, get you comfortable doing this work, and you have a lot of work to do outside of our webinars. But I'm putting this slide up just to keep at the top of your head, remember to think about those outcomes, short, intermediate, and long, and where those fit. So think to yourself, my outcome is, and where does it fit in there? And that's going to help you really figure out exactly what type of outcome you're looking for. And finally, now that you're using your evaluation plan template, I want you to go to step 2, either right now or when we finish up here, and I want you to write down the outcomes you have selected from your target group attachment that you will be measuring, and your program activities that are related to the outcome. So you really, on your template, you really should just list one outcome per row. However, you may have multiple program activities that are related to one outcome. Those could all be listed in the same row in that column too. Next week, we're going to focus on how to select measurement tools and adapt those tools. So this wraps up today's webinar. We hope you have a better understanding of farm-to-school outcomes, that you've made progress on your evaluation plan template, and that you continue to grow in your confidence to undertake this evaluation. So we hope to see you next week on choosing and adapting your tools. If you have not already signed up for it, you can go to this link on the slide and do that. At the end of today's webinar, like last week, you will be directed to a survey to help us improve our trainings. So think of it as your opportunity to participate in an evaluation of farm-to-school activity. And of course, our trainings only get better and better each time we do this because we get great feedback. And you also have an opportunity to be able to tell us what you would like to learn in the next webinar. Everyone who did sign up for webinar number 1 has received an invitation to join our virtual forum where you can post questions, share ideas, and let folks know what you're doing in your evaluation. And you can see that link right here. And finally, I just want you to know that through our USDA Farm to School grant, Spark Policy Institute is able to offer up to 4 hours of free technical assistance to sites or organizations who participate in this training series and are using our evaluation toolkit. I'm going to provide more information about that in our last webinar in the series. So I'm going to open it up. I know we're 1 minute over time, but I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. We had some great questions earlier. If you've got some more questions about some of the things we just have covered in this second kind of session after the first Q&A, please do put it in. If you still have questions about earlier things that we covered, you know, I'm open to any questions, and I'll do my very best to answer them. Here's a great question. Can you provide 1 or 2 measurement tools for youth empowerment in the Outcomes for Students category? So, you know what, I love this question. What I would love to say is, yeah, gee, I'll send that to you, you know, as soon as we log off today. The reality is that what we are doing is going through, you know, tools as we find them, or tools that people send us, hint, hint, and looking at them from the perspective of, do those tools seem to really hold together well? Are they good exemplars? You know, they don't have to be perfect, but are they good exemplars? Can they really be, you know, repurposed and easily adapted? And then we add them to our toolkit. I love that you've actually brought up the youth empowerment one, because this is a good one for us to keep our eyes open for. We don't have measurement tools on this right now. It's a really good one, and it's a really good outcome to add. So I'm sorry, but thank you so much. That is an amazing contribution to what we can help develop in the toolkit. The other thing I'll just say is that you should, if you're doing your evaluation in a month or 6 months or whatever, don't use what you downloaded today or what you've downloaded for this particular webinar training, because the toolkit really is a living document. We really are updating it. And so the way that you can make sure you have the most recent is to simply just go to the website. And it could either be that Spark website on the Social Innovators toolkits that I showed you in this webinar, or it can be on the Colorado Farm to School website. Either one will have the latest versions of our toolkits. Any other questions? We are 3 minutes over, but so for people who need to go, I certainly appreciate that. But I will leave it open for just a little bit more, just in case anyone has more questions. We really appreciate everybody who has been joining us for Series 4. We are looking forward to digging in and showing you how you actually choose appropriate tools for what you're trying to do for those outcomes that you are trying to measure, and then how you use existing tools, how you know how to adapt them. We've got a lot of really great guidance, helpful hints, and so don't be afraid of doing any of this. I do have to say, though I think everybody can do this work, it's a lot of work. So I'm not going to kid you on that. You do have to put time into actually putting together an evaluation plan and carrying out your evaluation. There are hours involved in this work, but what you really shouldn't feel nervous about is whether or not you can do it. Everybody can do this work. You really can, and I hope that this series will really give you the confidence and get you started on it. And again, remember, we do have the ability to offer 4 hours of technical assistance to anybody who finishes this series with us and has begun working on their evaluation and using our toolkit. So definitely take us up on that. We know from people who have already that they have really, really benefited from it, because, you know, it's not that you can't go ahead without us. It's just sometimes it's nice to be able to, you know, ask questions and get one-on-one advice. And we are happy to be able to offer that through our USDA grant. Okay, I'm looking to see if there's any more. So there's a very good question. Somebody asked, does the offer of 4 hours hold if you listen to the webinar recorded, or does it have to be live? So what is needed is that you listen to the series. I actually hope that you listen to it live, because I think that when it's live, you then get to ask some questions yourself during that. But I also understand that, you know, we actually do this webinar at different times across the country. and we have been moving it around. This is a particularly late one because we had heard that, teachers and food service directors needed a later one. But of course, no particular one works for everybody. So that's my way of saying we are open, very much open to offering the 4 hours, but we really do rely upon you having listened to all 5 hours of our series, because that's going to take you a long way toward getting your evaluation in place. Because I have to tell you, 4 hours of technical assistance sounds great, but it's not a lot in the big picture here. So you want to be as far along as you can to take advantage of us. Okay, with that, it is late, and I'm going to let everybody go. So hope to see you next week, same day, same time, for choosing and adapting your tools. Okay, everyone, thanks a lot for joining us.